What's up, fellas? It's James from Lucrative MMA. I'm back to drop some more knowledge on you. Today I'm going to be dropping the knowledge on the Marvin Vettori versus Jack Hermansson fight. So this isn't a fight that most of us was looking forward to because it's only just been made. So Marvin Vettori was actually slated to face Jacare Souza next week, but because Hermansson's original opponent, Kevin Holland, contracted COVID-19, they pulled Holland from the fight, and essentially they've switched opponents to give Holland more time, obviously, to recover from that COVID infection. So now Marvin Vettori fights 1 week earlier against Jack Hermansson this weekend, and Kevin Holland takes the place of Marvin Vettori and fights 1 week later against Jacare Souza. So I'm actually not unhappy about this. I'm excited for both matchups. I wouldn't mind any of these four guys fighting each other. I'd be happy with, either matchup, and we're getting Hermansson versus Vettori, which I'm very much looking forward to. You do have to take into account that Vettori is taking this fight 1 week earlier than he would have been doing, but as I say, he was still training for Jacare Souza, so it shouldn't be too much of a detriment to his fighting style or his chances to win, in my opinion. So let me get straight into the matchup. I'll start with Marvin Vettori. This guy's coming off an absolute good run at the moment. He's won his last 3 fights. He's on a hot streak. He believes he can challenge for the title. The current middleweight champion is Israel Adesanya, and that's actually Marvin Vettori's last loss. So before his 3-fight win streak, he lost to Adesanya in a close split decision. So there's no shame in that. It's the middleweight champion, and you took him to a split. And he was coming on strong at the end of that fight, which obviously bodes well for a potential 5-round fight. So what I'm saying is Marvin Vettori is going to be, and he is, which is evident in his last 3 matchups, especially his last matchup, he is going to be very confident coming into this matchup, no matter who he is fighting, because he took the current champion to a split. His only other loss in the UFC was against Antonio Carlos Jr., and that was actually his 2nd fight in the UFC. So I don't take much away from him for that loss either, because if you actually watch that fight, it was a close fight. He clearly lost 2 rounds to 1, but he had a huge second round, and just the type of style that Antonio Carlos Jr. brings, he defended that style pretty well. He didn't defend it enough to win the fight, but as I say, it was his 2nd fight in the UFC, and I'll get into that fight shortly, but again, I don't take much away from him for that loss. So he's had 2 losses in the UFC, and they were both close, and I can't really fault him on them losses. So just let me get into a bit of his style. So he's a pressure fighter. He likes to break opponents. He comes forward. He's got very good boxing. He's very fast. That's one thing that he doesn't get a lot of credit for, I believe, is that he's very fast. Okay, so he can touch his opponents, and his opponents can't touch him because they're not as fast as him. He doesn't look fast on the feet, on tape. He doesn't look fast, right? Because he's kind of, I don't want to say lumbering, because he is kind of on his toes all the time, so he's not super lumbering, but he's a pressure fighter, right? So a lot of pressure fighters, they don't look quote-unquote fast a lot of the time because they're not in and out, or they're not fighting on the back foot and countering really quickly. You think of someone like Sean O'Malley or Conor McGregor. These fighters are known to be fast. Pressure fighters are less known to be fast. Obviously, you can be fast as a pressure fighter. Jose Aldo, there's others as well. But they're not typically known to be super fast fighters. And when watching tape on Vettori, you probably won't think instantly he's fast. But the reason he is fast, and I know that, is just because what he can do to his opponents, okay? And he judges distance well as well. But I see him touch his opponents a lot, and his opponents can't really touch him. That's a mixture between his fastness and his controlling of distance. So people don't really give him credit for them 2 things, but I do. So yeah, he's a come forward fighter. He's a great boxer, but he also has very good takedowns, very good takedown defense as well. Elite takedown defense, actually. And he's an all-round fighter. There's no area that he is quote unquote bad at. He's a full mixed martial artist fighter. He's ranked number 9 or something at the moment, and and he's heading to the top. You know, he can do it all basically. So I'm going to go into that Antonio Carlos Jr. fight quickly, because that was the one that was the most telling for me when I was taping this matchup. So basically, in that fight, right, Antonio Carlos Jr. is a very good jiu-jitsu fighter, and he constantly attacked the takedowns on Marvin Vettori, and he tried to get Marvin Vettori to the ground many times. He managed to get him to the ground a couple of times, but when I stopped watching that fight, when the fight finished, what I took away from that fight is, damn, Marvin Vettori can defend a takedown. You know, Antonio Carlos Jr. was going with all his might to get that fight to the ground for virtually the whole fight, and he could only do it a couple of times, and he couldn't secure Marvin Vettori either. Now, he's very, very high level on the mat, especially at taking your back, and he never really troubled Marvin Vettori on the ground. In fact, in the second round, Marvin Vettori was able to take him down, and he dominated him from top position. Now, a lot of these jiu-jitsu guys, they're not amazing off their back, especially against very powerful fighters like Marvin Vettori, but they are way better at offensive jiu-jitsu, right? And I would class Antonio Carlos Jr. in that bracket as well. But he's still a good jiu-jitsu fighter, all right? I'm sure he trains on his back all the time. So it was very telling for me to see Marvin Vettori, a young Marvin Vettori, who's 23 years of age there, being able to not only defend the takedowns, the relentless takedowns of Antonio Carlos Jr., but also dominate him when he got him on the mat and in top position. So he's got elite takedown defense, right? We've seen that in some of his other fights as well. He's got high level takedown defense, and that's going to be very paramount in this fight because he's fighting a grappler in Jack Hermansson. I'll break down Jack Hermansson next. So he's a lot different than Marvin Vettori. I'd say Marvin Vettori is a more of meat and bones fighter. If you saw Marvin Vettori fight, you can kind of like say, oh, this is a similar guy. I've seen these type of fighters before. You know, they pressure, good boxing, stay in your face, they try to break people. Jack Hermansson's a lot different. He's very what word can I use? He's very unorthodox. He uses a lot of weird herky-jerky body movement, and he usually puts his opponents off in round one. His opponents, most of them will be watching tape, but it's different when you're in there. And Jack Hermansson is very, as I say, herky-jerky. He's in and out. He throws leg kicks when you wouldn't think he would throw a leg kick. He doesn't set a lot of his strikes up, which can actually be pretty dangerous because his opponents are not ready for it. And because he's known as a grappler, a lot of his opponents don't respect his striking, and that can be to their detriment, like it was for Jacare Souza. When he fought Jacare Souza, he dropped Jacare Souza to a knee in the first round, and he also hurt him in the fourth round as well. And that was because Jacare wasn't really respecting his striking. So I think Marvin Vettori needs to have his P's and Q's about him here, because, you know, even though I believe Marvin Vettori is a better striker, you don't just want to go in reckless against Jack Hermansson, because even though he's very unorthodox, he can have pinpoint accuracy when he needs to, as he did in that first round and a couple of the other rounds against Jacare Souza. So Hermansson, though, predominantly is a grappler, and he tries to get the fight to the ground in every single one of his fights. Much like his striking style, his wrestling style to get the fight to the ground is very unorthodox also. He doesn't go for the traditional double leg, single leg, and chain the takedown attempts together. He usually does a lot of weird things, like he jumps on the back, or he ends up in scrambles because there's clinch work going on. He's not a traditional wrestler, okay? And again, that's very dangerous for his opponents because they haven't seen this a lot before. Again, you can watch this on tape, but at the end of the day, when you're in there, you know, you're not used to it because you don't spar with the people who fight like Jack Hermansson with this herky-jerky, weird style of striking and takedowns, and he blends it well together. So Hermansson's last fight was against Kelvin Gastelum, and he was actually coming off a big stoppage loss to Jared Cannonier, who went on to fight for the title after that fight. So that was kind of a number one contenders fight. So if Hermansson would have won that fight, I'm pretty sure he would have fought for the title. So he's obviously he was obviously sad about that, and he got dominated in that fight, really. He tried to take Jared Cannonier down a couple of times, and he couldn't do it. And when he realized he couldn't do it, and when he felt the power of Cannonier, he broke. And he was dropped to the floor by an uppercut. And once that happened, Cannonier got on top, and Cannonier is very strong. We know that he has very solid ground and pound, and he was able to ground and pound Jack Hermansson out. After that, Jack Hermansson bounced back very well. He fought Kelvin Gastelum in his last fight. And Kelvin Gastelum, kind of silly decision from him. He initiated the grappling and he took Hermansson down, which you shouldn't do against a grappler. I mean, it's not rocket science. And Hermansson ended up reversing the position, and he actually tapped him out with a heel hook. So that was kind of embarrassing for Kelvin Gastelum there, because obviously he was. I'm not going to say he was talking a lot before that fight, but he seemed very confident before that fight. And to be stopped in the first round like that, especially from a heel hook, was it wasn't a good look for Kelvin Gastelum. But it was a great look for Jack Hermansson, and it put him straight back in the title contention. And now he's coming against Marvin Vettori. So, the moment you guys have all been waiting for, how this fight breaks down. So, I favour Vettori in this fight. I'll start off by saying that. But I'll also say that the bookies have lined this fight pretty well, or the public have bet it to a line that is pretty accurate, in my opinion. When I look at Hermansson versus Vettori, I just don't see many paths to victory for Hermansson other than a submission win. This is going to be 5 rounds, right? So Vettori is going to have 5 rounds to put that pressure style on Jack Hermansson. And we've seen Jack Hermansson does not like to fight on the back foot. I believe Jack Hermansson will be okay in the first round because he'll have a lot of energy. And as I said earlier, he often puts his opponents off in that first round. And I don't think it'll be any different against Marvin Vettori, at least for the first couple of minutes of that round anyway. But I just see Marvin Vettori's pressure style, his distance control being a deciding factor in this fight. I think he's going to keep touching up Hermansson, not with huge shots, but with solid enough shots to get his attention. And I think he will probably eventually break Jack Hermansson down in the 3rd, 4th or 5th rounds. I don't really see this fight go into decision. 5 rounds is a long time, because I just feel like the longer it goes, the more chance Vettori has to break Hermansson down. If it finishes early though, I'm pretty sure it will come from a Hermansson submission. So there's a few different ways you can play the fight. If you like Hermansson, I would go with Hermansson probably early, or Hermansson via submission, because I don't see him getting a decision over Marvin Vettori. His cardio is good, Hermansson, but I don't think it's going to be good when you have a pressure striker like Vettori coming in. And although he did fight a pressure fighter with Jacare recently and largely dominated him over 5 rounds, the huge difference between Vettori and Jacare in this fight, I believe, even though I believe they're kind of similar fighters, is that Vettori's just quicker. He's younger. His IQ of the game and his understanding of his skills are higher level than Jacare's at the moment. Not fight IQ in general, but what I mean is that Jacare was going in, and although he was pressuring like Vettori will do, he was trying to knock Hermansson out with one shot. He wasn't really putting his combinations together. Reason being, in my opinion, is because he's just not fast enough to do that. He can't judge distance as well as Marvin Vettori can. Marvin Vettori can afford to throw, 4, 5, 6 punch combinations, end them with a kick, because his gas tank is better than Jacare's, and his distance control is arguably better than Jacare's, and he's a lot faster. He's a lot quicker, so he won't have to try and catch Hermansson with these one knockout shots, because he will be quick enough to land the combinations. So although I do think Jacare and Marvin Vettori are similar fighters and they have similar styles, that is the huge difference, the quickness. So I just think that over the course of 5 rounds, Vettori is going to be able to break him down. Now, where I would line this fight, as I said, that the current betting line is pretty accurate in my opinion. I wouldn't line it too different than it's currently lined at. So If I just look, I've got it up here, on best fight odds, I have Marvin Vettori is about a minus 140 favorite, depending on where you bet. And Jack Hermansson is basically a plus 110 underdog. So I line the fight at Marvin Vettori winning about 62 to 65% of the time, which means I would line Vettori at about a minus 160. So he's currently at about a minus 140. So there's a bit of value on the line there, depending on how much value you need to bet it. At the moment, he's currently lined at about a 58% probability. I'm saying he's got about a 62 to 65. So in my opinion, we're at about a 4 to 8% or something like that edge on the bookies, which is pretty decent for a bet in my opinion. But I know a lot of people have a lot of different ways they bet, and some people need a lot more edge than others. So yeah, as opposed to where the line will go, I've got no idea. If we just check here now, we can see that Marvin Vettori opened up at about a minus 160, and the line's kind of been steady since then. It got bet down to minus 140, minus 130, and it's kind of sat steady at that line for a while. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does sit steady at that line, but again, I really have no idea where this line will go. On one hand, you got Marvin Vettori, who, in my opinion, stylistically is definitely capable of winning this fight, and as I say, about a 62-65% chance of him winning this fight. So, you can see maybe Marvin Vettori getting bet up to that minus 150, minus 160 range. But at the same time, Hermansson is the name, right? Hermansson's coming off a stoppage over Gastelum, who is another name. And Hermansson's just known a little bit more in the industry and among casual bettors, in my opinion. So I could see Hermansson being bet also, especially at that underdog odds, that plus money. I wouldn't be surprised to see Hermansson being bet at all. So I'm not sure where the line will go, and I'm not sure if I will have a bet on it myself yet. I'm still have a lot of the other card to look at before I lay my money on this one. Because as I say, although I think Vettori should break him down, he is still a close fight, and Hermansson's always live for that submission, always live for that heel hook or something like that. So yeah, that's it for me from today. Keep a lookout on my YouTube channel for the free bet video, which will be out later in the week. And I will see you in the next one.